Nahum 1-3. God's wrath against Nineveh. Chapter 1. God's wrath against Nineveh. Chapter 2. The destruction of Nineveh. 3. Woe to Nineveh. To whom much is given, much is required. Nineveh had been given the privilege of knowing the one true God. Under Jonah's preaching, this great Gentile city had repented, and God had graciously stayed his judgment. But now, about 150 years later, Nahum proclaims the downfall of once mighty Nineveh. The Assyrians had forgotten their revival and had returned to their habits of violence, idolatry, and arrogance. As a result, Babylon would so destroy the city that no trace of it would remain, a prophecy fulfilled in painful detail. Habakkuk chapter 1-3. The righteous will live by his faith. Chapter 1. Habakkuk's complaint. 2. The Lord's answer. 3. Habakkuk's prayer. The book of Habakkuk is not so much the sermons of a prophet as it is the saga of a prophet plagued with a problem. Looking around his native Judah, Habakkuk observes violence and injustice on every hand. What he sees causes him to cry out to God with his perplexing questions. Why are the wicked prospering in your nation, Lord? Why are the righteous beaten down? Why don't you do something to right the wrongs of society? God's reply is even more shocking than the blighted conditions in Judah. I am doing something, Habakkuk. I am about to use a nation even more corrupt than Judah, the Chaldean, to cleanse my people of their wicked ways. In stunned disbelief, Habakkuk responds, How in the name of holiness can you do that, God? And when God patiently answers the prophet's question, Habakkuk responds in prayer and praise with faith that has resounded through the centuries. Zechariah 1-3. The day of the Lord is near. Chapter 1. The coming judgment on Judah. The day of the Lord is near. 2. The judgment on Judah's enemies. 3. The judgment on Jerusalem and the nations. Zephaniah's pungent pen records only 53 verses, but in the process set forth some of the strongest statements of judgment in the Old Testament. Looking out over the nation of Judah in particular and the world in general, Zephaniah fashions his fiery verbal assault. The day of the Lord will come with fury, ferocity, and finality, and God will have the last word. Retribution and judgment will give way to restoration and joy in that day. Haggai chapter 1-2. A call to build the house of the Lord. Chapter 1. A call to build the house of the Lord. 2. The prophet glory of the new house. Blessings for a defiled people. Zerubbabel, the Lord's signet ring. The last three books of the Old Testament, Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi, are the so-called Post-Exilic Prophets because each was addressed to the returnees from the Babylonian exile. Under the leadership of Zerubbabel, the people began the task of rebuilding the temple, Ezra 1-6. But 14 years later, the temple foundation is covered with weeds rather than walls. Instead of completing the house of God, the people are busy building their own homes and careers. Into this sorry scene of misguided priorities steps Haggai to exhort the people to put first things first. Half-hearted obedience, Haggai reminds them, will never result in God's wholehearted blessings. Zechariah chapter 1 through 4. The gold lampstand. Chapter 1. A call to return to the Lord. The man among the myrtle trees. 4 horns and 4 craftsmen. 2. A man with a measuring line. 3. Clean garment for the high priest. 4. The gold lampstand and the 2 olive trees. The opening 6 verses of Zechariah's book give the reader valuable insight into how the visions that Zechariah relates should be interpreted. God is calling his people back to a fresh commitment to him, a commitment demonstrated in rearranged priorities and rekindled worship. God desires to cleanse and use his nation. Like a candlestick and lamps, Israel can bear light to a darkened world, not by might, nor by power, but by my spirit, says the Lord of hosts. Chapter 4, verse 6. Zechariah chapter 5 through 8. Fasting turned to feasting. Chapter 5. The flying scroll. The woman in a basket. 6. 4 chariots. A crown for Joshua. 7. Justice and mercy, not fasting. 8. The Lord promises to bless Jerusalem. 2 years after his series of night visions, Zechariah addresses a question that has arisen during his ministry. Should the returned remnant continue to observe days of fasting to commemorate the event of the deportation to Babylon? God's answer, justice, mercy, and compassion are more important than insincere fast. With that principle in view, Zechariah presents a glorious picture of God's future blessings for the nation, when there will be feasting instead of fasting, a promise designed to encourage the remnant to live righteously in the present day as well.